I love my kids. I've got other kids too, Baruch Hashem. I love my kids. I don't think of my other kids every single day. But my daughter that passed away, I think of her every single day, multiple times. So Olam, the world to come is very real to me.
Welcome back to another episode of Inspiration for the Nation. And some of the most difficult periods in people's lives are the challenges that come up to them that you can never prepare for. If you're watching or listening to this and you're a parent, you are constantly worried about your children. I know my parents are constantly worried about me, and I know I'm constantly worried about my kids. You always want the best for them. You want them to live a happy life and to thrive. And Rabbi Asher Resnick and his wife's life came to a halt when they found out their daughter had cancer. And with a lot of davening, a lot of treatment, she beat it. But they were not out of the woods. And unfortunately, years later, she passed away. And we had a very, very open conversation about his experience. He told me no questions were off the table. And we talk about the struggle, the challenge, and how someone moves on with their life after one of their children passed away tragically. And we also talk about the afterlife. What's the Jewish perspective? I mean, here's a world famous Aish rabbi who gets a lot of questions from a lot of people curious about the faith. So I asked him, what's his perspective on the afterlife and what could someone do for a loved one who moved on? And it's a very special episode. This episode is in memory of Chana Bas Moshe this week. Thank you. And her neshama shav aliyah. This episode is also in memory of Shem David ben Yaakov Shlomo, as well as Miriam Sarah Bas Yaakov Moshe. And you will hear about a podcast by Rabbi Yaakov Danishevsky that you should be listening to. You'll also hear about how your Pesach will be made easier with Pick Purple. And you're also going to hear about our good friends at BitBean and how they're going to help transform your company into a super company. Now, here's my conversation with Rabbi Resnick. I'm Yaakov Langer, and you're listening to Inspiration for the Nation. Thank you so much, Rabbi Asher Resnick, for coming in to talk about a lot of things, but I want to get right into it. How old were you and where were you in your life when your life kind of just came to a halt of like, what is going on?
How old was I? Let me think. I was in my 30s, mid-30s. We were living in San Francisco. My wife and I had moved from, it's an amazing thing. We went from Yerushalayim to San Francisco. And this is in the late 80s. And I was I was a Rabbi at Aish HaTorah, so I was believed in giving Torah principles to as many people as I could. And we went to San Francisco to teach. I was teaching classes on Jewish medical ethics and Jewish legal ethics to groups of doctors and lawyers all throughout the Bay Area. But once we were there, I figured, let me do some classes in my house. So I also did that, and whoever wanted to come could come. So that was, so I was in my mid-30s when I was doing that. Okay,
so could you explain to everyone, like, what was it in your life that like totally shook everything up?
Yeah, so I was doing this class at my house, and I was doing different topics. Then I got to a certain stage where I figured, let me do some real fundamentals. So I did a class called Bad Things to Good People, 2 parts. Part 1 is understanding it intellectually. Part 2, dealing with it emotionally. So I did class 1, and then I was about to do class 2. And the afternoon before class 2, dealing with it emotionally, we got a phone call from a doctor who told us the devastating news that our daughter had leukemia. She was 2 years old at the time. And that was the class that I canceled because we were dealing with our daughter's situation. But it was so striking that I was about to talk about the topic of how to deal with it emotionally, and then we were really dealing with it emotionally.
What, did you look towards anyone for guidance of like, how is this happening?
Yeah, so of course this is way before cell phones. So Rabbi Noach Weinberg, my Rosh Hashiva, did manage to track us down and call us when we were in the hospital. So along with all the trauma I was talking to him about, I mentioned this incredible juxtaposition. was so strange. And I suggested him perhaps there was something wrong with me teaching this class because I was a young person, didn't have too much difficulties. So how can I'm going to make myself like I'm a big expert on these topics. So he told me, no, that's not right. You're going to be teaching people Jewish principles. People need to know that. And there's nothing wrong with that. So it's interesting. He didn't give me a real reason. He didn't suggest, so what is the answer? What was the juxtaposition? So I thought about that a lot over the years. And one of the things I basically came to was this is something which has to be articulated. No one sets out to be an expert in challenges in life. No one wants to be that. But when it's thrust upon you, then you have to say to yourself, now that happened, how do I now take this very traumatic situation and try to do something positive in it? I heard many years ago from Rabbi Zev Leff. He says, when a trauma happens, people ask, why? Lama. He says, you can also ask, lama, for what? So lama is focusing on the past, lama is focusing on the future. So to me, the lama was, now let me teach these principles. Because people shy away from these topics. But once I was immersed in it, basically we had over 2 years of treatments with our daughter, first in San Francisco, then in New York. Then we came back to Israel. By that point, she was in remission, where the cancer's not detectable. But I always felt I have a special need and ability to teach this topic. So I taught this topic all the time.
And I want to get more into it and like what you're teaching about it. But take us back to the experience emotionally. What were you and your wife going through when you found out and for like those first few days?
That's a good question. What was I going through? See, I was very fortunate that Rabbi Weinberg really instilled basics of emunah and bitachon in a very real way. So, if anything, I felt closer to Hashem than further. Maybe that sounds strange to people.
It totally sounds strange,
you think I'd be angry,
right? I thought
resentful.
I thought it was either going to be sad or anger.
See, I'm kind of a private person, so this is a super personal issue.
The most personal.
And what did I do? The first thing I thought is, let me get the most people who can possibly know about this to daven for my daughter. And then now, of course, when you do that, you open yourself up because it's so personal. But now the whole world knows about it. So through Aish HaTorah, I know a lot of people that know a lot of people. So all the Aish HaTorah branches and all the people in Yerushalayim and everyone's davening for my daughter. So that was the first thing I thought so I felt, and of course my own davening is enormously more significant, more meaningful. So interestingly, I felt closer to Hashem through the trauma.
But you didn't have any, listen, I think the Emunah B'tachon, the belief and trust in God is amazing, but there was never levels of like, why me, Hashem?
Yeah. Why me? So did I ask that question? Why me? I don't know if I asked that question. I don't think I had a good answer for that.
I don't think anyone has an answer, but I'm just curious
Right.
if that was like how you...
No. I just kind of felt this is our situation now. I didn't ask for it, but that's the situation. Now let's try to be different. I had the feeling, even from the beginning, if God willing, everything goes well, my daughter gets treatment and she gets better, that we may look back on this as the best thing that ever happened to our family.
You had like hope.
Well, for sure I had hope.
Right.
The truth is we had a very good prognosis.
Really? Okay.
Leukemia happens to be, childhood leukemia happens to, this is even like a long time ago.
Right, which the technology, it was
even then,
not,
they
right.
told me 90% at least have a good outcome. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't worried. It never occurred to me that it wouldn't work out. It was more like just it's a trauma, but we'll grow from it. And then we'll end up being much stronger because of it. And I thought my daughter will be a different person. I'll be different, but I might be a different person. So it wasn't like a sense of a betrayal, God forbid. It wasn't like that. It was more like, okay, we're growing And I didn't want this. I didn't ask for this. But now that's our situation. So I'm being like bumped up to a much more serious level of being a Jew.
Medically, what was the, I guess, span of what happened to your daughter? So she got leukemia at 2.
Right.
And went through, just take us through.
Yeah. So what happens? You get chemotherapy. It's interesting. At that time, we were given the option to be part of a study. And people told me in general, you should do that. Because when you're part of a study, you get like the really cutting edge.
Like experimental.
Yeah, but you get the best that's available then. Mm-hmm. So there were 3 choices. There were 3 legs to the study. And one involved radiation. And I remember thinking to myself, I really hope we don't get the radiation. But I joined the study. So then once you join it, whatever you're assigned to, you do. And we didn't get it in the end. Mm-hmm. And everything went very well. Everything went well. You get chemotherapy. You're in the hospital initially about a week or so. Then almost everything else is outpatient. And we had very good treatment, very good care. We were, of course, San Francisco has very good doctors there, good hospitals. So it was a lot of time to deal with this, but not. I always felt for sure it's going to work out. For sure, my daughter's going to get better, and we'll be stronger for it, and we'll look back and we'll say, "Wow, it was us before, and now we're up here afterwards."
How old was she when it came back?
About 11 and a half, shortly before her bat mitzvah. By that point,
it's just such a long time from the beginning. So you probably felt like we're out of the woods.
Right. The general rule of thumb is when you're in remission for like 10 years, then that's basically it.
I always thought the number was 5 years, but maybe things change or shift.
Maybe they said 5, but I guess my mind was 10.
Right.
But here was almost 10 years.
Wow.
And so they told it was very unusual to come back.
How did you feel when I came back?
That was really rough. It was like just a kick to the gut. I was like, so.
Because you thought you are like, oh, we're out of there, coast is clear.
Also, the difference is when she was 2, she's a little kid. So we're dealing with it. Now she's 11. Mm-hmm. Now she's dealing with it as a person. Mm-hmm. So it was hard, very painful to see her have to deal with that. And of course, a girl to lose her hair.
Right.
That's very hard.
Especially at that age. It's
very hard. Very hard.
Like, yeah, how did she go through the process emotionally?
She was a very strong girl. She was a very strong, very tough girl. And so, of course, it was very traumatic. But we were hopeful. And we were actually advised to do a bone marrow transplant, which is a huge undertaking. And we did it. And everything went according to plan. And we were actually in the hospital over Rosh Yom Kippur. But okay, fine. That's our situation. We're in Hadassah. So I got to know the Chagall windows a lot. Because we were for Shabbos, you always go to the shul in Hadassah. So it was just a feeling, okay, it's time, but we're growing from it. And she'll be fine, and she'll grow up, and she'll be great, and it'll all turn out for the best. That was the feeling I had. And she also, I think, was like that. She was a very strong girl. So she also was growing through it.
By what point did you know it was the end?
Well, what happened was when it came back after about 6 months, that was when it was really rough. In fact, that's when we changed her name. Her name was Rivka, and we were advised to add a name, so we added the name Ruchama. And we even asked her, would you rather be Rivka Ruchama or Ruchama Rivka? She chose Ruchama Rivka. But we still felt it'll work out. In the end, we did 4 bone marrow transplants. So that was unusual. I don't think it rarely happens like that. But I never felt, even when she went to the ICU, even so, I was confident she'll come out of it. And
do you think it was more of like the faith there, or is more of like a coping kind of mechanism for you?
Probably a combination. Mm-hmm. But I did feel it's going to for sure work out. So it was for sure a bitachon, a trust issue. And I'm sure it was a coping mechanism because you can't live with that possibility of the worst thing happening to you.
So was there a point before she passed away that you kind of accepted that she wasn't going to make it, or
No,
never? So when she actually did,
she was in the ICU for a week. I was still confident for sure it's going to work.
And what was your wife like during that
She went into the ICU on a Shabbos. And I remember thinking to myself, just get through Shabbos already so I can make a phone call to people that we know to start davening for her. And once Shabbos finished and I was able to make a phone call, I thought, oh, thank God. It was like the cavalry. Like, okay, good. Now we got the daveners working for us. So I felt also no problem.
I'm not a psychologist, but is there? It sounds like a little like denial, like your daughter's in the ICU of like what's going on, and
I guess you could say that.
and you're like, okay, let me just, it's the people of Amidst, I'm going to daven, and then we'll be fine,
Yeah, you're right. It probably is.
And what was your wife like during like?
My wife was amazing. She was amazing. She lived in the hospital for months.
Right.
Literally for months on end.
As you I guess raised the rest of the kids.
Yeah, it was a whole thing. But she was, as I said in my eulogy for my daughter, I mentioned I couldn't imagine a better mother for our daughter. So,
right,
it was amazing. She did everything for her.
When your daughter actually passed away, what, like, I can imagine that in general, someone losing anyone is difficult. Someone losing a child is like the next level of pain. But for you, I think there's an extra added layer because you were so, I guess, maybe hopeful that potentially it's going to work out. Even when and you could say, hey, that's not the case here. But even when someone has bitachon and faith, it's because we trust that good's going to come from it. So it's just very difficult in the moment of like, how in the world is your daughter passing away? Like, what good is going to come from that? So like, in that moment, like what?
So I'll tell you, I would say what happened was it was a tremendous shift at that moment that till then I always felt for sure it's going to work out. And when I say work out, I meant in this world.
Right.
Once that happens, now it's like, okay, now it'll work out in Olam Ha, in the world to come. I have an analogy that I thought of then, and I've thought of many times since then. Imagine a family in Europe, and one of their children wants to make Aliyah.
To move to Israel, yeah.
To move to Israel, right. Like in the 1700s. So then they know once the child starts the journey, they'll probably never see them again.
Right.
But they feel a special feeling because their child's in a more elevated place now. And they feel a sense of pride and satisfaction that we help to contribute to our child being in that place where they can go to this elevation. That's what I felt. And one thing I would tell you is Olam Haba is very real to me. It never was like that. That's one of the challenges for a religious Jew, that the world to come should be a real, tangible reality. And we try, but now it is. Like I tell people, there hasn't been a single day in the over 20 years since my daughter passed away that I haven't thought of her multiple times. That's a literal statement. That's not exaggeration. Right. I think of her multiple times, every single. I love my kids. I've got other kids too. Baruch Hashem. I love my kids. I don't think of my other kids every single day, but my daughter that passed away, I think of her every single day, multiple times. So the world to come is very real to me.
We'll be right back to this week's episode, but I have to ask you all a question. Are you looking for something that goes beyond the surface? A podcast that doesn't just scratch the itch of curiosity, but dives deep into the soul? Then you have to listen to The Attached Life, hosted by Rabbi Yaakov Danishevsky, who was a guest on Inspiration for the Nation. And it's not often that I come across something that truly speaks to the journey of self-discovery and healing in the way that this podcast does. Rabbi Danishevsky masterfully intertwines psychology and Torah, offering a depth-oriented perspective that's both enlightening and grounding. And it's exploring the long, short road to the inner healing, understanding our deepest selves, and nurturing our past wounds back to health. And what I personally love about the attached life is its commitment to authenticity. It doesn't promise quick fixes. Instead, it invites listeners on a profound journey to develop a deeper connection with themselves, their loved ones, and of course, Hashem. The discussions on developing new strengths in places where there's hurt or deficiency are particularly impactful. And each episode is a treasure trove of healing ideas, hope, and insights into nurturing more fulfilling connections. And Rabbi Danishevsky's approach gives you the tools not just to understand yourself and your relationships better, but to actually thrive within them. And what I hope and what I believe you'll find is that the attached life offers a broader and deeper understanding of what it means to truly live a fulfilling life. It's a guide to being fully alive, embracing the complexity of our nature, and finding the joy in the connections we cherish the most. So, if you're seeking to embark on a journey of self-discovery and genuine growth, make the attached life your next listen. Trust me, it's more than a podcast. It's a companion for those looking to better their lives in the most meaningful of ways. Find it wherever you get your podcasts and take your first step towards a more connected, fulfilled you. Link in the show notes. And now back to my conversation with the rabbi. I was going to ask this later on, but you brought it up. Was there any challenge, and I'm sure your kids are amazing, but was there any challenge by the fact that because, you know, Rivka passed away, and obviously from that point on, it was like, okay, how could we elevate, you know, her neshama, her soul to the next level? And it's always doing things in her memory. Did your kids ever did you ever have the challenge of like making sure your kids don't, you know, feel left out? Or
Yeah, that is a challenge. It is a challenge. There was an amazing organization we worked with, that worked with us really, and they do a lot of activities for the other kids for this exact reason. So our kids actually had all kinds of activities. They would even there's even some different kinds of trips they can go on and different things they can do. So they felt special that they're able to do these activities which their friends aren't doing. So now, of course, I guess there's a natural feeling of, I mean, like my wife was in the hospital for months and months.
Right.
So I'm trying my best to deal with my kids.
Right. But it's funny because like I feel like adults understand it more, but when someone's like a young kid, as you had like young kids then, they sometimes don't understand like, you got to do what you got to do. That's why your wife's in the hospital. It's not because she particularly loves, you know, Rivka more than them, but sometimes it's hard for them to really understand that.
I'm sure it is. And we were concerned about that. We tried, you do your best. You do your best to try to do that. Happens to be, Baruch Hashem, all my kids are married now. I just actually had we just finished Shara brachas for my youngest, for my son. And thank God my girls are all married and they have kids themselves. So it's interesting, actually, after Rivka passed away, we, of course, naturally thought about therapy. Should we have therapy for ourselves, for our kids? So the advice we were given was make sure your kids know it's an option, but don't push them. If they don't feel they need it, don't say, no, you have to do it. And that's what we did. We made it clear that we're happy to do it.
What ages were the kids at that point around?
Let's see. Rivka was 14 and a half when she passed away. The next one was 13. And actually the one afterwards became bat mitzvah during the Shiva. And then there's the one who was like around 8 or 9. And then there's our son, who's the youngest. So they were all pretty young.
Maybe you don't have to answer. We could take this out if it's too personal. Did you go to therapy?
We tried once or twice, but we didn't get too much out of it. I tried making inquiries, a very good therapist. I didn't really get any good leads. My wife and I went once or twice. We felt, I'm not getting out of this. So we didn't continue.
Did Rivka ever express fear of dying?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe my wife would know that, but I don't recall her ever saying that. I think the feeling she had was it's going to work out.
And did you ever have like, I guess probably not. You never had like maybe not an actual goodbye conversation, but did you have like towards the end like a bigger kind of conversation with her?
Not really. The last week was very different because she was in the ICU. So she was in, I don't know exactly how, I don't understand medically exactly. It was like sort of like she couldn't talk. But I was told that she can hear, that she can process. So I was definitely saying things to her then, very lofty types of messages during that time.
Could you say something? I mean, maybe it's too personal, but like what? Like what are you telling her?
I was telling her, well, I'll back up a bit because, like I said, I'm very fortunate. Rabbi Weinberg he was the first Orthodox Jew I spoke to my entire life. And he was my Rebbe, he was my Rosh Yeshiva, he was my guide.
To clarify, you're a Baal Tshuva for
yes, I am. I'm a Baal Tshuva,
right,
yes.
Okay.
I was 22 years old when I met him. And he was literally the first Orthodox Jew I ever had a conversation with my entire life.
Where are you from?
I'm from Los Angeles.
And you never spoke to an Orthodox Jew before?
Not once.
Interesting. Okay, fine.
I think there's a big difference between East Coast and West Coast. If you're in the West Coast, you can really be totally distant from Judaism. I knew I was Jewish, and I probably would have been said I'm proud of being Jewish, but I never had any connection with anyone Jewish, anyone religious. So he, I lost my train of thought. So he was, so you asked me before.
The lofty conversations you had, so you want to
yeah. Okay, right. So I'll tell you one thing that he oftentimes said to us students, and this is something I conveyed to Rivka. He would say, look, Judaism believes God's a creator, sustainer, and supervisor. He created the world, keeps the world going, and he runs the world. By definition, that means nothing random, because he runs the world. But it also means if he created you, he used to say, a creation of something from nothing is by definition a creation of something for nothing. Meaning to say, before you were born, before you existed, you didn't deserve to exist. You couldn't deserve anything.
Right. I wasn't a thing yet.
You weren't a thing yet. Exactly. And therefore, he says that tells us if the most valuable thing we have is life, and life is an undeserved good, that is an expression of the fact that God loves us. So it's very interesting. Rabbi Weinberg used to always emphasize the 6 constant mitzvot. To know there's a God, and know God is one, and don't believe in any powers, and know God, love God, fear God, don't follow your desires. But more often than he talked about the mitzvah that we should love God, he would always say, God loves you. So that was really part of my foundations. So that was how much I was giving to my daughter. God loves you. It's all for the best. And I must have said that over and over again, especially when she was in the ICU. I would hold her hand. I would sit next to her. God loves you. It's all for the best. It never occurred to me like, oh, let me say goodbye to you. Because I was sure, as you said, it's a coping mechanism. I was sure she's going to get out of it and we'll be fine. And this is a little bit rougher, bigger bump. Now we're in the road now. But that was a big part of it. God loves you. It's all for the best. That was a big part of my messages to her.
Did you ever have some form of a breakdown after she passed away? Like maybe it's clearly there's a shock there, but then like, I don't know, like 2 months later, you're just like, what? Like, what is going on?
No, I don't think so.
Which, by the way, as I'm asking, I'm like, you don't seem like the type from your personality.
No, I wouldn't say that. I never did that. I'll tell you an interesting phenomena. There was another Aish HaTorah colleague of mine who was going through a similar. His wife was ill, and then in the end, tragically, his wife passed away. But there was about a year overlap between his trauma with his wife and with my daughter. So we would sometimes speak to each other. There was something that I found, and I asked him. He's told me the same thing. When we had relatively good news and things were going well, we were less thinking about God. When it was a trauma, we felt closer to God. Now, it sounds very counterintuitive.
It also sounds scary. It's like, oh man, like now the way to get close to God is with tragedy.
Okay, but that worked. That's
just the reality of what happens.
That was with me, and I asked him, was that? He said, yes, the same thing. So when things got rougher, I felt closer. And of course, your prayers are different, and you're thinking about things differently. And everything you're doing is you're trying to. Someone asks you for a favor, like, of course I'll do a favor. Like, what wouldn't I do to try to have more merit for my daughter?
Right.
So, and like I said, the biggest shift that happened when she passed away was to be focusing much, much more on the world to come, and not just this world.
And we're going to talk about, like, you know, your understanding and definitions of like souls, heaven, the world to come, what's going to be. Getting a little meta there, but before, let's dive into, to me, very, I guess, juicy conversation of, and I'll start off with a question. We'll take it in all directions. Why do bad things happen to good people?
Right.
We don't know. Okay, thank you for listening to this week's.
So first of all, there are different categories of explanations. Like in my book, I talk about a number of different categories of explanations. The first one that I always try, this is the one that I think to mention first, is messages. There's a very beautiful classical Jewish work called The Torah's Avraham, from Avraham Grodzinski. He was the father-in-law of Reb Shlomo Volbe, and he was murdered during the Holocaust. So he writes about the concept of prophecy. And he says, what's the function of prophecy? We know that a prophet can't give us new laws, new mitzvot. He says a function of a prophecy is to give us clarity about reality. You know, we think we're doing pretty well. The prophet tells us, no, we have to improve. So he asks the question, what about today? We have no prophets today. We don't need clarity of reality today. If anything, we only need it more. So he answers very powerfully. There's a type of prophecy today, and it's called challenges and difficulties. That's a type of prophecy. So one explanation is messages. There's other things as well. There's what's called an onish. The word onish is usually translated as punishment, which I think is a very wrong translation. I call it consequences in therapy. Another category is kapara, a spiritual cleansing. Another category is a nisayon, a test, meaning we're being tested, and to bring potential out of you. There's other things. The other categories are those, I would say, the biggest ones. And then there's also, by the way, a category of self-imposed yisurim, so self-imposed difficulties. If someone's irresponsible, and then they have problems that comes out of that, then sometimes the answer is because you were irresponsible.
Right. If someone eats a lot of food and then they get overweight and unhealthy, that's just a function of.
And let's say you don't invest in your relationships, and then you have problems in your relationships. That's really painful. So then that's the reality. So these are some of the categories. That's one thing. Like I mentioned before, the starting point has to be that God loves me. What I have is not a gift. That's an important idea. We think to ourselves, what we have is ours. My children, my money, my body. It's not. The Judaism says it's all a deposit. It's all from God. It's a deposit. Use it properly. Everyone hopes you'll have whatever you have, as we say, till 120 years, but it doesn't always work out that way. So when it comes to difficulties, we always have to remember the verse in Job and Eov, which tells us Hashem nasan, Hashem lakach. God gave, God took. We never have anything taken that wasn't given to us initially. So the bottom line is, whatever I have is a blessing, and I should appreciate it. And when it's taken from me earlier than I would want, you have to say thankfully I had it till now.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. It's I don't think anyone should go through the challenge of losing anyone, especially losing a child, but it seems so, at least from, my personal experience, like it seems so like, and maybe my priorities are wrong. I'm just being honest. Like nothing else for me really matters more than my children.
Yeah.
And like nothing. And of course I'm let's say obsessed with growing this podcast or work or maybe that's more constant, but why am I doing this all? It's like, so I could give to my kids who I love unconditionally.
Right.
So it's like just so hard to wrap a head around like losing that child,
It is. It's a massive, massive trauma. It's the best analogy, actually. Someone suggested it during our Shiva. It's like an amputation. If a person loses a limb, God forbid, they can still have a good life. They can still laugh at a joke. They can still enjoy things, but you never forget that you lost a limb. So my wife and I enjoy life, and we enjoy our children, our grandchildren, and I'm very fortunate. I'm a teacher in Aish HaTorah, so I enjoy very much having ability to impact people there. So my life is filled with blessings, but I never ever forget that my daughter's not here. So basically, just try and keep a relationship with her, even in the world to come, which is actually a remarkably possible thing to do, more than people think.
Yeah, I was gonna say the average, because I'm sure people seek you out for your guidance and your help when they lose a child or a loved one. I'd imagine most of them are giving over this idea of like, how am I supposed to go on with life? Like, how am I able to? So
there's a beautiful idea I saw in the Aish Kodesh. Aish Kodesh is an incredible collection of talks by one of the Hasidic Rebbe who was living in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he would teach his students on Shabbos, and then after Shabbos write down the notes. Then he buried them, and he was murdered during the Holocaust, and then afterwards someone discovered them, and it was published. So one of the ideas he talks about is that it's possible to maintain a relationship with our deceased loved ones. And it's a two-way relationship, actually, because what are they missing? They're missing a body. They can't do actions. They can't learn Torah. They can't do mitzvot. We gain from them because they are lifting us up. And they're like, there's many, many things that I do. And I think to myself, my daughter's helping me. There's no way, how could I be doing this? My daughter's helping me. So she's giving to me. And then I do all kinds of things in her merit. So it's a real relationship.
That is very beautiful. Yeah, I think if someone's like an atheist or agnostic, whatever, then
I can't imagine. That to me seems so overwhelmingly depressing and difficult. I don't know how you could survive.
I won't give away too many details. I know someone in my life that they're no longer Orthodox, and the family is. And there was someone who, passed away, and more, not the, grandparent, not like that. And he's, I don't know the word, agnostic, doesn't believe in Hashem, whatever it is. And not necessarily out of anger or whatever, he's on his own journey, but it's funny, he's doing better than the rest of his family.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I also would have gone with your approach of like how, like it's,
okay.
You have what to, not you, we all have what to look up, look up to, you know what I mean? Like it's all for the next world. So it's terrible, but at least, okay, this is, we know our goal. With there, it's like.
Well, I will tell you something, which is something that Rabbi Weinberg told us many times, and I see it myself in my own teaching. He used to say there's no real atheists. Everyone believes in God. In fact, in my book, I even talk about what I call a proof someone believes in God. So there's proofs of God, and then there's proofs that someone believes in God.
What's a proof?
What?
What's a proof that someone believes in God?
What is that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Now, paradoxically, the proof comes specifically from the issue of difficulties, which is what you would think is why people don't believe in God. Mm-hmm. So it's like this, very simple. People say, why do bad things happen to good people? What are they assuming? Obviously, bad things are not happen to good people. Okay? Now, if you believe in God, and you think God is good and God is just, and God's involved in the world, that's a very logical assumption. Bad should not happen to good people. But let's say you don't believe in God. So then, on what basis are you saying bad things shouldn't happen to good people? If you take God out of the picture, then there's no reason why bad things shouldn't happen to good people. It's a random, chaotic world then. Mm-hmm. So the question makes no sense without believing in God. So that's step one. So I say that to people. Someone could respond to what I just said and say, I'm asking the question, not because I believe in God. I'm asking, it's a contradiction on you, a believer. Someone would say to me, do you believe in God? I say yes. So how do you explain it? Okay, so the person would say, it doesn't prove that I believe in God. I'm just asking a contradiction on you. Mm-hmm. Okay, very fine. However, when people ask this question, are they asking because they're curious or because they're bothered? They're for sure bothered. So if they're bothered, and I would say even more than bothered, they're outraged. And even though in today's world we're quite desensitized, anyone who's aware of what's going on October 7th isn't outraged. Everyone I know is outraged, and everyone you know is outraged, and everyone that we all know is outraged. So that means, now what is outrage? Outrage is when our expectations are violated. Mm. So the example I like to use is, imagine someone, God forbid, betrayed you. You'd be outraged by that. Imagine it was your friend. More. How about your relative? More. What you see is, the more you expect something should not happen, but then does happen, the more outrage you feel. Now, who's outraged by the appearance of injustice in the world? Everybody. That means that everybody believes in God. You follow what I'm saying?
I get it. Well, let me question it, but maybe they believe in people. Meaning,
no, you're saying, why did Joe
let's say
sick?
October 7th.
Okay.
So they're not outraged at the world or because things are random to them, but they're outraged at the people of Hamas of like, how could you be so evil?
You're right. So that happens to be a man-made evil. So you're right. You could be directing your outrage at them.
Okay, but you're talking about.
So let's pick an example of illness.
Right.
So then you say, how could it be? Joe is such a nice guy. How could he be going through this terrible medical trauma? And Sarah is such a wonderful person. How could she be going through this? In the case like that, so what do you mean? How could they? What do you mean? Maybe. So, of course, you could hope difficulties don't happen, but you can't expect that they wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. Expecting makes no sense unless you believe in God. Mm. I'm saying everybody is outraged by this issue.
When you say, you mean like emotionally, like they're so bothered.
Yeah, because their expectations are violated. Mm-hmm. They're saying, how could this be? So what do you mean, how could it be? If you take out of the picture...
Anything could be.
Exactly.
Right.
Anything could be.
Right.
It's a silly question to say, how could it be? It's like watching some scene in the jungle. How'd that lion eat the deer? I don't know. He was faster. What do you mean, how could it be? So how could it be makes no sense unless you believe in God. And you have to believe in the Jewish concept of God. A God who's good, who's just, mm-hmm. runs the world. So that is one example of an indication people believe in God.
A very powerful moment in this week's episode is coming up. But first, let's get real for a second. You're running a business, let's say, right? Maybe you're not. But if you are, bear with me. You've got goals, dreams, but let's face it, it's also a lot of headaches. I'm talking about the kind of tech problems that make you wish you'd major in computer science instead of following your passion. Well, guess what? You don't need to go back to school for that. You just need BitBean. BitBean is not your average software company. These guys are the leading software creators in the Jewish world for a reason. And also, they're pretty big in the rest of the world as well. They understand that every business is unique and cookie cutter solutions just don't cut it. They get it. And that's why they sit down with you, get to the heart of your issues. And then here's the best part. They create custom software that's like a magic wand for your business. Let me paint you a picture, okay? There was this one company struggling to keep pace with demand, losing track of orders, a mess. BitBean steps in and bam, they develop this elegant, streamlined system that not only solves the issues, but boosts efficiency through the roof. And we're talking about a game changer that saved them time, money, and let's be honest, probably a few gray hairs. I mean, come on, who wouldn't want that? It's not just about the tech. It's about partnering with someone who gets your challenges and has the smarts and the skills to push you ahead of the competition. So if you're tired of tech headaches and you're ready to take your business to the next level, you've got to check out BitBean. Seriously, don't waste another minute. Visit bitbean.com and let them show you what they can do. Because in today's world, smart tech is not just an option, it's the difference between thriving and just surviving. Go ahead and check out our friends at bitbean.com. Now we'll be right back to this week's episode. But first, a lot of people on WhatsApp have been asking me because I posted something about Pick Purple. Pick Purple makes your Pesach easier. Actually makes your whole year easier. We all have clothing that we don't want or need, and it's just wasting space in our closet. Pesach's coming up. We're cleaning. We're cleaning the kitchens. We're cleaning the basements, our closets, the coat, everything. And we have things that we don't need anymore. You could throw it in the garbage. Who does that? It's good stuff. Why would you waste it? Or you could donate it to Pick Purple. Pick Purple goes ahead and takes it and uses that and gives it to the people who need it most. Of course, they actually sell it to them at like a very, very, very good price. And they take that money and they help girls who are struggling. It's like a beautiful idea. You could obviously check out a lot more about Pick Purple on their website, pickpurple.org. But what I love about it, like, of course, you're doing good. You're helping those who actually need clothing for like really cheap. They'll buy your shirt for like $1 or something like that. And of course, it's going to help the girls in need. But more than that, let's be selfish for a second. Let's say you don't care about helping others. Let's say you say, I just want it to be taken away. So you just simply put it in a bag. You go on the website, or you could even text them, and they send you, you tell them exactly when you want it picked up. They come, you leave it right outside. You write Pick Purple on it so they know it's for them. And they go take it. You don't have to see them by the door. It's like Uber Eats where you don't have to like see the guy who comes to the door. It's very simple. It's easy. Go to pickpurple.org. I guarantee there's tons, not say tons, there's items in your home that you don't need that others could wear it and use it. And Pick Purple does great stuff. So go to pickpurple.org right now and make your Pesach and your year better and better for others as well. Now back to this week's episode. As time goes on, of course, you're not going to forget about your daughter, but I'll just quantify by year. Does each year get easier in a way for you?
So I'll go back to what I said before about the amputation. Imagine someone, God forbid, loses a limb. So it takes a while to get used to that. So you get used to it. I'm used to not having that limb. Mm-hmm. It's not easier. It's just you're more, that's my reality now. My reality is I don't have that limb. But the sense of loss and of course, in different ways, it happens over time. Like at this point, Rivka was my oldest. Now she was 14 and a half when she passed away. So now all of her younger siblings are now married. And even her baby brother, he was actually her donor. He was actually her bone marrow transplant donor.
Wow.
He was like 2 years old at the time. He just got married. So it's strange to see my kids all moving through life. I mean, it's wonderful to see, obviously. It's wonderful to see moving through life, but then thinking, like, of course, our daughter never got married, and of course, she never, ever. So, yeah, so that's how I would say. You get more used to it. You get more, that's my reality. My reality is that limb is missing.
So when I was once talking to, they mentioned that they lost their daughter at a similar age, and the thing that stung for them, they obviously were very happy, but it just hurt them so much, is when they were getting invitations for the weddings of the other children from that class.
Yeah, so that took a while. I mean, for us, Judaism talks about the first year being more intense, and it was more intense for us. like the cycle of the holidays was very, very painful for us. Every holiday, that's one of the sad realities, is that times of celebration are the most painful times because the contrast is so dramatic then. So the first cycle was very hard, and the second cycle was hard, but then you get more used to it. More like that's our reality now. But no, I'm very happy when I see. I mean, by this point, all of her friends probably are married by now. So no, I'm not like I'm not resentful. I'm thrilled that all these other people are moving on in their lives. That's fantastic. But okay, that's it. That's the reality. You have to realize also, the original plan was there was no death in the world. In the Garden of Eden, there was no death. So the fact that we're used to the idea of people, let's say what a full life is, till 80, till 90 or something. So that's also not ideal. Okay, now she was younger. I can say, in Judaism, there's a concept we call kamus and echus, quantity and quality. Her life wasn't as long as it would have liked, obviously, but the quality was very amazing. She impacted so many people, and specifically through the trauma, she impacted many, many people. She grew through it. So there's a feeling of satisfaction, of special feeling of, we had a really amazing daughter. Like, how did she deal with that? How did she grow through the difficulties? And she was able to be even more lofty and more special as a person. So of course it's painful not having her, but to see her having lived a life that was so meaningful and so rich, that helps.
Is there? We can't cover the whole book, and for anyone watching, they should definitely go buy "Pain is a Reality, Suffering is a Choice," and I'll put links in the show notes for anyone to go pick it up. But could you explain the title of the book a little more?
Yeah, it's a lot in the title of the book.
Yeah, but you could tell it's a powerful statement.
Yeah. Well, there's the word in the Hebrew word Yisurim, which is loosely translates as difficulties and pain. I find is often translated as suffering. So the topic of Yisurim is the topic of suffering. I think that's a very problematic translation. So what I oftentimes say is, when you want to know the proper meaning of a Hebrew word, the ideal situation is you find that word in a verse in the Torah. So the verse in the Torah that really captures the meaning of the word properly, I believe, is a verse in Devarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse 5. So the verse says like this: you should know with your heart, just like a parent gives Yisurim to the child, God your Lord gives you Yisurim. By comparing God to a parent, the verse is telling us, even just like a parent will sometimes do something for a child which is painful, but it's being done for the benefit of the child from the love of the parent, in a similar way, God will do that for us. So based on that verse, I would say the word Yisurim is painful challenges and difficulties given from God's love for our benefit. Okay, now that's kind of wordy. On a simpler level, I would say that you see that Yisurim, difficulties, are painful, but there's a purpose. So on a simpler level, we could say, what are Yisurim? Pain with purpose. So what would pain look like if there was no sense of purpose? That would be suffering. So pain with purpose is Yisurim. That's challenges and difficulties for God's love for our benefit. And if there was no sense of purpose, it would just be pain. It would be suffering then. So we can't always control the pain in our lives. Sometimes pain enters our lives and we can't control it. I mean, sometimes we are irresponsible, but something like with our daughter, she was 2 years old when she got leukemia. There's nothing we could have done differently, nothing she could have done differently. So it entered our lives. That's a reality. That pain was a reality. But suffering is a choice. So the title of the book comes from that verse, that we have to realize that while we cannot control the pain in our lives, we can always control how we relate to the pain.
What's your practical advice for someone who's gone through pain and they don't want to, and they've been suffering and they don't want to continue to suffer? How do they get out of that? It's very easy to fall into that mold of like feeling shame and why me, why this happened. How do they get out of that?
So the key word in my title is the word choice. And I think in particularly in today's world, that's such an important word. We live in a time when people people wonder, how much choice do we even have? I mean, we live in a curious time where you can there's a sense of victimhood, like you're stuck and you can't even control what happens to you. That's not a Jewish perspective. So the first thing I would say to tell this person is, I mean, okay, obviously you have to know the details. I don't want to be callous.
Yeah. You're talking in general here.
In general, right?
Yeah.
Obviously,
don't copy and paste this automatically and tell this stuff.
The first step is to realize there's a choice. There's always a choice. If you're alive, there's a choice. So when we got the diagnosis for our daughter at the age of 2, we could have fallen apart. And we could have, but I think because we dealt with it, how we dealt with it, we grew from it, and we were able to help other people with it. There was a choice to make there. So the first thing to realize is, of course, you can't control the pain. I mean, again, there are some cases, yes, but oftentimes not. You can't control the pain, but how do you want to deal with it? And even from just a psychological perspective, it's so much more empowering to make choices. Don't see yourself as a victim. It's such a debilitating situation to see it like that. Make choices. Realize that if you say to me, but how do I see anything good? So that really touches on a very basic Jewish concept we call in Hebrew sameach bechalko, taking pleasure in your situation. The question I often like to ask about that is to say, the idea of take pleasure in your situation, to be happy with your situation. Do you need to believe in God to do that? I often ask that question.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Okay.
Right? The way I like to put it is, we all have a partially filled glass. We can all choose to focus on the part of the glass that's filled and feel good, or the part of the glass that's empty and feel bad. There's no one who doesn't have something in their glass, and there's no one who doesn't have something that they would like to have, which is not there in their glass. Everyone has that. If you're alive, you have something in your glass. You can choose. But there is an element to that, a concept of sameach bechalko, taking pleasure, being happy in your portion. There's an element that you have to believe in God for. And that's sameach bechalko, being happy in your portion, in your distinctive portion. That you have to believe in God for. Meaning to say, whatever you have, your blessings and your challenges were given to you for a reason. So that, there's no way to do that.
You're saying you could only, with believing in God, be happy for the or seemingly negative in someone's life.
Yes.
The positive, of course, that's fine. That's easy. The positive in one's life, you don't necessarily need God to see that.
Exactly.
But you need God in your life to appreciate, I should say.
Even negative. The challenges.
Right.
Correct. Mm-hmm. The way I like to put it is, let's say I would give you a pair of shoes. And let's say your size is 5'9". Here are some beautiful shoes and they're size 7. There's no point in that. You can't put them on. Here's some gorgeous shoes. They're size 13. There's no point in that. That's the Jewish perspective. Whatever you have is tailor-made for you. Now, again, that you only can do it with believing in God. That's what we call in Hebrew, hashgacha pratit, divine personal supervision. So you have to believe in God for that. I do believe in God. So I do see that the situation with my daughter was orchestrated. And so I wouldn't have chosen it, but now that God chose it, I can say for sure there's many people over the years I've been able to help, and now particularly through my book, that I would not have been able to help in the way I can if not for the trauma of my daughter. Again, I wouldn't have chosen it, but now it was chosen for me. A lot good came out of it, a lot.
As we get towards the end of this interview, I want to switch gears into that, just giving the Jewish explanation to like what souls are, what olam haba, the next world, what is it, and what's like actually going on there.
So Judaism says every human being has a body and a soul, and our real identification is the spiritual part, the soul part. And we look at our body as being like the clothing. And I remember years ago hearing that one of the great Musar teachers, one of the teachers who teach about self-improvement, pointed out, even when it comes to the people who live the most superficial lives, they also realize this. He says, you go to let's say a Hollywood star. At the eulogies, they try to find something good that he or she did. They're not talking, oh, she was the most gorgeous, he was the most good looking.
I think I saw, maybe it was a mishpacha, they by the, I forgot which gadol, because all the guys were talking about it. I think it was specifically with Babe Ruth. In the eulogy, it did mention that he was like the best baseball player, but a very big highlight was like how he did like chesed for like orphans or something like that.
Right.
And like there was something to talk about, but they kind of veered off to talk about, yes, Babe Ruth, the great baseball player, look how kind he was to others.
Right.
You know, so it's...
And at the end of the day, it's our qualities that live on. And this is the concept we call in the world a legacy. Mm. We all know a legacy. You want to leave something behind in a positive way. So that's really the Jewish perspective. And we even talk about the concept, what's called in Hebrew, Gilgulim. I have a chapter on that in my book, reincarnation. And the idea, which, by the way, I don't know how you could possibly deal with a young person passing away without bringing in the concept of reincarnation. Because, like, there's no way my daughter did something that would make that deservable at the age of 2, right, or even at the age of 14 when she passed away. She was a young girl. Right. So, but maybe there's a previous lifetime. Mm. So the idea that your soul is who you really are, and also the idea that there's a purpose. You're not in this world just to have a good time. You're in this world to accomplish something. Happens to be that when you live a meaningful, productive life that is very enjoyable, but enjoyment's not the purpose. The purpose is the accomplishment. Enjoyment is what happens when you live a meaningful life. So that's a key thing. That's very key, very Jewish perspective. That life has a goal, a purpose, and we want to try and accomplish something. And when I live a meaningful life here, it's fascinating that Judaism doesn't talk about the world to come in the Torah itself. That's a famous question. Why the Torah itself never mentions the world to come explicitly. It hints at it many places, but not explicitly. Whereas other religions sometimes, like, does anyone have a doubt the Christians believe in the world to come? They talk about it all the time. Right. Does anyone have a doubt that the Muslims believe in the world to come? They're talking about it all the time. One thing I think is very beautiful in Judaism is we value life. We really appreciate life. And we do, and of course, it's very well known that virtually every obligation in Judaism is pushed aside for the preservation of life. Mm-hmm. So yes, we believe in the world to come, and that's an important belief. But we don't ever, God forbid, denigrate this world. Mm.
Interesting. Okay, and how would you explain what is olam haba? Like what is it? Is it like clouds and wings? Or?
Yeah, right. So the way I like to put it is, there's an expression, you made your bed, now lie in it. The world to come is simply the actualization of the values and the wonderful deeds you did in this world. I'll give you a fantastic analogy. This is not my own analogy, so I can praise it. It's not my own. I think it's a fantastic analogy. So imagine a person passes away, like they say, goes upstairs, and he's walking around and sees a giant palace. Okay, walks into the palace, sees this a huge banquet hall, walks in, and he sees an incredible, gorgeous banquet hall, and the tables there are laden with beautiful, delicious food. But the people in standing next to the tables are famished, like skeletons. It's like, what's so bizarre? There's delicious food there, and they're starving. He realized that all of them have a board. Oops, sorry.
Okay.
All of them have like a board, and they can't bend their arm. So their arms are all straight. So the food's right there, but they can't get to their mouths. So it's like really like, horrible.
Should bend down.
Yeah, okay, but
They can't bend either. Yeah, got
okay,
it.
whatever it is. Right. So that's it. So they can't eat the food. So it's a horrible scene. Like, oh my gosh, get out of here.
It's a nightmare, yeah.
It's a nightmare. He walks out of there. Off in the distance is another palace. The second palace, again, has a banquet hall. And again, gorgeous, beautiful food. And people also have the board. They can't bend their arms. But here, everyone's very well fed. How'd that happen? He realizes that each person can't get the food to their own mouth, but they can give the food to their neighbor. So, and therefore they're all very well fed. The first banquet hall was a banquet hall full of takers. The second was a banquet hall full of givers. So if you live your life and you're fundamentally a taker, you will be a taker forever. If you live your life as a giver, you'll be a giver forever. So that's a beautiful analogy in my mind, because the qualities you live with are the ones that you have forever. Happens to be, by the way, there's a concept that if your kids do things in your merit, you can actually gain even when you're in the world to come. So
Someone's hand by the first banquet hall is like slowly bending. He's like, what? Because his kid is,
doing something good.
Yeah. He did like an act of kindness.
Exactly.
I hear that. Before I ask my last question, and I know we could easily speak for 8 hours, I want you first off to tell people how they can connect with you, your website, where they could buy your books. That's the first thing. So
okay. Actually, I have a story I want to tell you.
Okay. And then I was going to say, is there anything else that you'd like to share? And then I'll ask my last one. So yeah, first go with the story.
I was going to say, this is, I think, a very powerful story. And okay, it's very powerful. And this is, I don't tell stories unless I know they're true. I just don't do that. This is a story that I know is true. I know all the people involved in the story. And this is a story that happened in the early days of Aish HaTorah. There was a Holocaust survivor whose son came to Israel and got to Aish HaTorah and started learning in Aish HaTorah. He was becoming observant, to the dismay of his father, the Holocaust survivor, who was raised religious and after the Holocaust had abandoned things. Then the sister came, maybe to rescue the brother, and then she starts learning. And now the father is like beside himself. He gets on a plane, and he comes to Aish HaTorah. He's standing outside the Aish HaTorah Beis Medrash, the study hall, and he's screaming and blaspheming against God. I was in the camps. I saw my parents were so religious. All the people were so religious, and look what happened to them. And where was God then? And all the students are like, oh my gosh, like so awful to see that. But what do you say to him? He's got numbers on his arm. What are you going to tell this person? Finally, one of the students goes right up to him and says, I want to ask you a question. If you had to go back right now to the camps, either as a prisoner, as you were, or as one of the guards, what would you choose? He says, in a second, I'd go back as a prisoner. I would never be one of the guards. And it was a very big change for him, because he realized, as awful as what he had gone through was, it could have been worse. He could have been one of the evildoers. So to me, this captures Jewish history, and it also captures what happened on October 7th. In the ancient battles, one of the most honored positions was the guy that carried the flag of the country into the battle. Who was the enemy shooting at? That guy. That's us. we're carrying God's banner into the world. So they shoot at us because not everyone likes morality, strangely enough. So they shoot at us. And it can be very painful, very awful. And on October 7th, and of course, many times in Jewish history, it was horrible. But would we ever want to be anything other than the one carrying God's message in the world? Certainly, God forbid to be the one attacking that, for sure not. But we're the ones carrying God's message in the world. That's what we're doing. That's how I look at October 7th. It was horrendous. It was terrible. But thank God I'm part of the people that is in this world to accomplish something. And we've accomplished a lot. Look at the world. Things that were unknown concepts in the world at large. Love your neighbor. Everyone's created in God's image. Tzedakah, giving charity, universal education. Everyone has rights and everyone has dignity. These are ideas that we take for granted in the world. Mm. And we gave these to the world. So yes, it was pretty horrible, but thank God I'm part of the group that's carrying the message into the world.
Really beautiful. Okay, before my last question, where could people find more from
Okay,
you?
so first of all, I have a website called jewishclarity.com. And on that website, there's a place you can order the book, a book called Pain is Reality and Suffering is a Choice. I'm hoping it's still available in the Jewish bookstores. I can give you my website, my email rather. My email is aresnick@aish.com, aresnick@aish.com. And by the way, people can email me and just ask me anything. I'm happy to answer questions.
Right. I anticipate that you'll get some emails, and unfortunately, people going through some things, I think they're going to want to reach out.
But I do feel the book has a tremendous amount of resources and ideas and insights, which unfortunately is very much needed today.
Right. And for anyone listening, we didn't even cover like 3% of it. So there's a lot more.
There's a lot in the book.
A lot more wisdom to get.
Right.
I want to finish off with a question. Maybe I should have given it to you before because it might be hard to think of one, but it's kind of out of left field. Could you share one of your favorite moments with Rivka? And it doesn't need to be like, and this story then all of a sudden went and inspired millions. Like, just the moment that you cherish.
Well, with all my kids, before their bar or bat mitzvah, I would learn with them, and I would learn with them two things: the 13 principles that the Rambam tells us are the foundations of Judaism, and what we call the 6 constant mitzvot, the ones that apply all the time. So she was the oldest, so she was the one I did this with first. And when I was doing with her, I think it was probably she was in the hospital over the time because it was like 11 and a half. So this is the time I would be normally doing it close to the bar mitzvah. I think she was in the hospital. To me, the fact that we were able to learn that together, she was able to understand it together, and she was able to deal with that. I mean, of course it was painful for her. I mean, who wouldn't be painful? But it's the fact that she was able, we had a special relationship, and we were able to discuss the ideas. One of the things that was very special to me was she would ask me a question, say, there's this issue I'm wondering about. What do you say about that? It was a wonderful feeling to have my daughter turning to me with some insight. How can I give her some guidance in this area? So I would say that was one of the special that I was able to teach her principles about Judaism and life. She was able to be comfortable to ask me questions as a father to give her guidance in issues she was wondering and dealing with, and just in general, she was someone who was very strong. And we were able to see the strength in how she dealt with her situation. That was also very, very gratifying as a parent to see that.
Rabbi Resnick, thank you so much for coming in and sharing this all with us.
Look, I hope, like I said before, no one ever wants to be an expert in difficulties. But once you are in the situation, I hope that the principles I learned are helpful for people. Unfortunately, we need guidance in today's world. I hope that the principles of my book and the principles we spoke about today will be able to help many people.
Thank you. Thank you for watching or listening to this week's episode. And if you haven't yet picked up the Rabbi's book, you could pick it up in the link in the show notes. And if you got this far on the YouTube video, go ahead and leave a comment that I know that you got to this far. I'm not going to give you a word. I'm going to give you leave a comment so I know that you watched it full through. Let us know your thoughts in it, your takeaways. There's so many good points here. And if you haven't yet checked out our friends at PickPurple, go to pickpurple.org. If you haven't checked out our friends at BitBean, go to bitbean.com. And of course, if you haven't yet checked out the Attached Life podcast, go ahead, check it out. The link in the show notes. You're going to love it. And I think episodes like this make me reflect, and it's so hard to even imagine what the Resnicks went through. But I also want to take away of the appreciation of what we have and who we have. So the loved ones in your life, after you're listening to this, make sure to give them an extra hug or kiss or whatever it is to show that you appreciate them. Life is very busy, and we often are busy with things that keep us busy. But the most important things we often just look past. So I think this is a reminder to always cherish and remember the ones we love. And if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and share this with others. We have some fantastic guests coming up. I have too many. I mean, there's only so much Motzei Shabbosim in a week. So get ready next week for an awesome, awesome episode. Thank you for watching. And remember, inspiration is everywhere. L'chaim. Living L'chaim.